The sun beat down on the gleaming cars lined up outside Premier Motors, one of the city's most prestigious dealerships. Michael "Big Shaq" Thompson, a successful real estate investor known for his larger-than-life personality and infectious smile, pulled up in his weathered Toyota Camry. Despite his considerable wealth, he believed in staying humble and had decided it was finally time to reward himself with a luxury vehicle after closing a major property deal. As he stepped out of his car, wearing simple jeans and a plain white t-shirt, Big Shaq noticed the immediate shift in the atmosphere. The sales representatives who had been eagerly approaching other customers suddenly became preoccupied with their phones or paperwork. He stood there for a moment, taking in the beautiful vehicles while waiting for someone to acknowledge his presence. After what felt like an eternity, a young sales associate reluctantly approached him, barely making eye contact. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. Before Big Shaq could respond, the dealership manager, Mr. Richards, strutted over with an air of superiority. "I'll handle this," Mr. Richards dismissed the sales associate with a wave of his hand. Looking Big Shaq up and down with poorly concealed disdain, he asked, "Sir, are you sure you're in the right place? These vehicles might be a bit out of your range. Perhaps I can direct you to our used car division down the street?" Big Shaq's usual warm smile didn't falter, though something flickered in his eyes. He'd faced similar treatment before and had learned to handle such situations with grace. "Actually," he replied calmly, "I'm interested in the new S-Class. Would you mind showing me the top-tier model?" Mr. Richards couldn't suppress a condescending chuckle. "The S-Class starts at $110,000, sir. The top-tier model is closer to $180,000. Perhaps we should discuss financing options first?" His tone made it clear he assumed Big Shaq couldn't afford even the base model. Other customers had begun to notice the exchange, some watching with discomfort, others with mild amusement. A few sales associates hovered nearby, exchanging knowing glances. Big Shaq remained composed, though his heart raced with a mixture of frustration and determination. "No need for financing," he responded quietly. "I prefer to pay cash." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pulling up his banking app. "Would you like to see my account balance before we continue this conversation?" Mr. Richards scoffed, crossing his arms. "Sir, we deal with serious buyers here. If you're just here to waste our time." Big Shaq interrupted him gently, turning his phone screen toward the manager. Mr. Richards's eyes widened as he saw the seven-figure balance displayed. The color drained from his face as he realized his grave mistake. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted palpably. Other customers who had been pretending not to watch now stared openly. The same sales associates who had ignored Big Shaq earlier began to inch closer, their expressions a mixture of shock and regret. But Big Shaq wasn't finished. With the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout the encounter, he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Richards, I came here today not just to buy a car, but to expand my business fleet. I was planning to purchase 5 vehicles for my real estate company. However, your treatment of me today has shown me exactly what kind of establishment this is." The manager's face had now turned an alarming shade of red. "Sir, I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Big Shaq continued, his voice steady but firm. "You chose to judge me based on my appearance rather than treat me with basic respect. That tells me everything I need to know about how you'd handle after-sales service." He turned to leave, then paused and addressed the stunned onlookers. "Success isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about character, something that seems to be in short supply here." With that, he walked toward the exit, leaving behind a showroom full of whispers and a thoroughly humiliated manager. As he reached his Camry, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the owner of a competing dealership across town. Word had already spread through the industry grapevine. "I heard what happened," the message read. "We'd be honored to earn your business, Mr. Thompson." Big Shaq smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about rising above and letting your success speak for itself. His mother's words echoed in his mind, "Son, let them underestimate you. Their judgment is their limitation, not yours." As he drove away from Premier Motors, he felt at peace, knowing he'd taught everyone present a valuable lesson about prejudice and presumption. The following morning, Big Shaq sat in his home office, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. His social media notifications were buzzing non-stop. Someone at the dealership had recorded the entire incident, and the video had gone viral overnight. Comments poured in from people sharing similar experiences, praising his composure, and condemning Premier Motors' behavior. His assistant walked in with a stack of messages. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she said, placing them on his desk. "3 news stations want interviews, and you've got calls from every luxury car dealership in the city. Oh, and Premier Motors' owner has tried to reach you 4 times." Big Shaq leaned back in his chair, thinking about how a simple car shopping trip had turned into something much bigger. He picked up one of the messages. It was from Rising Star Motors, the competing dealership that had texted him yesterday. Their owner, Mrs. Chen, had built her business from scratch over 20 years, earning a reputation for exceptional customer service. "Let's visit Rising Star Motors today," he decided, standing up. "But first, I need to make a call." He dialed Premier Motors' owner, Mr. Patterson. The call was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Thompson," Patterson's voice was filled with genuine remorse. "I can't apologize enough for what happened yesterday. I've spent the night reviewing our security footage. Mr. Richards' behavior was completely unacceptable." "Thank you for calling," Big Shaq replied. "But I'm more interested in what you plan to do about the bigger issue. Mine isn't an isolated incident." There was a pause on the other end. "You're right. The video opened my eyes to something I should have been paying attention to all along. I'd like to meet with you, not to convince you to buy from us, but to discuss how we can do better." Big Shaq checked his watch. "I'm heading to Rising Star Motors this morning, but I can meet you for lunch." "This isn't about revenge, Mr. Patterson. It's about making sure nobody else experiences what I did." After agreeing to meet at a local restaurant, Big Shaq headed to Rising Star Motors. The difference was immediately apparent. As he pulled into the parking lot in his Camry, Mrs. Chen herself was already walking out to greet him, a warm smile on her face. "Mr. Thompson," she extended her hand. "Welcome to Rising Star Motors. I'm Lisa Chen. I heard about yesterday's incident, and I want you to know that we judge people here by their character, not their clothes or car." The showroom was smaller than Premier Motors, but it felt more welcoming. Mrs. Chen personally showed him their collection, discussing each vehicle's features without any assumptions about his budget. When they reached the S-Class models, she simply presented the facts and let him lead the conversation. "I'll take 5, Big Shaq said after careful consideration. 3 S-Class and 2 GLS models for the company fleet." Mrs. Chen didn't act surprised or overly excited. She simply nodded and started processing the paperwork. As they sat in her office, she shared her own story of facing discrimination when she first started in the automotive industry. "People didn't think a woman, especially an Asian woman, could run a successful luxury car dealership," she said. "But like you, I let my success speak for itself." By the time Big Shaq left Rising Star Motors, he had not only purchased 5 vehicles but had also found a new business ally. Mrs. Chen's approach to customer service aligned perfectly with his own business philosophy: treat everyone with respect, regardless of appearances. At lunch, he met with Mr. Patterson from Premier Motors. The owner had clearly had a sleepless night, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. They found a quiet corner table at the restaurant. "I've let go of Mr. Richards," Patterson began, but Big Shaq raised his hand to stop him. "Firing one person doesn't solve the systemic issue," he said. "Tell me about your training programs. How do you teach your staff to interact with customers? Patterson looked down at his untouched salad. We don't have any formal training programs for that. We focus on product knowledge and sales techniques. That's where we start then. Big Shaq pulled out his tablet. I have some connections with diversity and inclusion training consultants. They've helped me train my real estate team. Would you be interested in their contact information? Patterson's eyes widened. After everything that happened, you're willing to help us? This isn't about me anymore, Big Shaq explained. It's about making sure the next person who walks into your dealership wearing jeans and a t-shirt gets treated with respect. It's about creating lasting change. As their lunch continued, they drafted a plan to transform Premier Motors' culture. Patterson committed to implementing comprehensive staff training, reviewing hiring practices, and creating a customer feedback system. He also agreed to start a program offering internships to students from underprivileged backgrounds interested in the automotive industry. The video of the incident continued to circulate, but now it was accompanied by news of positive changes at Premier Motors. Other dealerships in the city began reaching out to Patterson, interested in implementing similar training programs. Big Shaq's phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Chen. The cars would be ready for delivery tomorrow. He smiled, thinking about how a moment of humiliation had turned into an opportunity for widespread change. His mother had always told him that true success isn't just about personal achievement, it's about lifting others up along the way. A month had passed since the incident at Premier Motors, and the changes in the local business community were remarkable. Big Shaq sat in his new S-Class, parked outside his real estate office, reflecting on how a single moment of discrimination had sparked a movement of positive change. His phone lit up with a news notification. The local business journal had just published an article about the transformation at Premier Motors. Under Patterson's leadership, the dealership had implemented comprehensive diversity training, and the results were showing. Customer satisfaction scores had soared, and sales were up despite initial concerns about reputation damage. As he walked into his office, Big Shaq's assistant handed him an invitation. The Chamber of Commerce wants you to be their keynote speaker at next month's Business Leadership Summit, she said, excitement in her voice. They want you to talk about changing business culture and eliminating discrimination in customer service. Before he could respond, Mrs. Chen from Rising Star Motors called. Mr. Thompson, you need to see this, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Remember that young man who was washing cars at our dealership when you bought your fleet? The one you spoke with about his dreams of becoming a salesperson? Big Shaq smiled, remembering the conversation. The young man had been meticulously cleaning one of the display cars, and they'd struck up a conversation about career aspirations. Of course, how's he doing? He just made his first sale, Mrs. Chen announced proudly. And you'll never believe to whom, the former manager from Premier Motors, Mr. Richards. Big Shaq nearly dropped his phone. Mr. Richards? The same one who? Yes, Mrs. Chen continued. He came in looking quite different, humbled. He apologized to me about what happened with you, saying he'd spent the past month really thinking about his actions. When our young car washer approached him with genuine enthusiasm and professionalism, Mr. Richards was impressed. He ended up buying a modest C-Class, but more importantly, he asked about our training program. The irony wasn't lost on Big Shaq. The same manager who had judged him by his appearance was now learning valuable lessons from a former car washer. It was proof that change was possible when people opened their minds. Later that afternoon, Big Shaq visited Rising Star Motors to congratulate the young salesman personally. Walking into the showroom, he saw the familiar face light up with recognition. Mr. Thompson. The young man rushed over, professional but clearly excited. I used everything you taught me about treating every customer with respect. Mr. Richards actually thanked me for making him feel comfortable, can you believe it? Big Shaq patted him on the shoulder. I believe it because you earned it. You saw him as a person, not just a customer or a former manager who made a mistake. Mrs. Chen joined them, beaming with pride. Our young star here has already signed up 3 more customers for test drives today. He's a natural. As they chatted, Patterson from Premier Motors walked in. He looked surprised to see Big Shaq but smiled warmly. I hoped I'd run into you soon, he said. I wanted to tell you personally, we're launching a mentorship program next week. We're partnering with the local community college to offer internships to students who might not otherwise get opportunities in luxury car sales. The news spread quickly through the business community. Other dealerships began reaching out to both Premier Motors and Rising Star Motors, asking about their training programs and customer service approaches. The local news picked up the story again, this time focusing on the positive changes rippling through the industry. Big Shaq's phone buzzed with a message from his mother. She had sent a link to a social media post. Someone had created a before and after compilation video. The first half showed the original incident at Premier Motors, the second half showcased clips of diverse salespeople at various dealerships, including the young man at Rising Star Motors making his first sale. You did good, son, his mother's message read. You turned a moment of darkness into light for others. That evening, Big Shaq sat down to prepare his keynote speech for the Chamber of Commerce. He decided to focus not on the incident itself but on the transformation that followed. He wrote about how true leadership isn't about pointing fingers but about pointing the way forward. He included the story of the young salesman, Mr. Richards' journey to self-awareness, and Patterson's commitment to change. As he worked on the speech, he received an unexpected email from a National Automotive Industry Association. They wanted to feature the story in their monthly magazine and develop a case study for their training programs. What had started as a local incident was now poised to influence dealerships across the country. Big Shaq leaned back in his chair, thinking about how far things had come. His mother's words from childhood echoed in his mind, when someone shows you their limitations, show them possibilities. He had done exactly that, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, wisdom, and a commitment to positive change. The next morning, he drove to a local coffee shop in his Camry. He still kept it as a reminder to stay humble. Inside, he overheard 2 young men discussing job applications. One was worried about applying to a luxury car dealership, citing the old reputation of discrimination in the industry. No, man, haven't you heard, his friend replied. Things are different now. Ever since that Big Shaq incident, these places have really changed. My cousin just got hired at Premier Motors last week. They don't care what you look like or where you come from, they care about how you treat people. Big Shaq smiled behind his coffee cup, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones that make headlines, but the quiet changes in people's hearts and minds. His phone buzzed with another message from Mrs. Chen. The young salesman had just closed his second deal. The wheel of positive change kept turning, one person, one interaction at a time. The grand ballroom of the City Convention Center buzzed with anticipation. Over 500 business leaders had gathered for the Chamber of Commerce Leadership Summit, and Big Shaq stood backstage, reviewing his notes one last time. In the front row, he could see Mrs. Chen sitting next to Patterson, and surprisingly, Mr. Richards was there too, seated beside the young salesman from Rising Star Motors. As the chamber president introduced him, Big Shaq took a deep breath, remembering his mother's words, "When you speak your truth, speak it with purpose." He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, but it was the genuine smiles of recognition that touched him most. 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady and warm, I walked into a dealership wearing jeans and a t-shirt, looking to buy not 1, but 5 luxury vehicles. What happened next probably wouldn't have made headlines 20 years ago. But today, thanks to someone with a smartphone and social media, it sparked a conversation that's still going. The audience listened intently as he continued, but this isn't a story about discrimination. It's a story about transformation. It's about what happens when we choose to turn moments of shame into opportunities for growth. He gestured toward Patterson and Mr. Richards. It's about leaders who had the courage to admit they needed to change, and then actually did the work to make that change happen. It's about young professionals who proved that excellence knows no boundaries. He smiled at the young salesman, who sat straighter in his chair. Since that day, 17 dealerships in our city have overhauled their training programs. Over 200 sales professionals have completed comprehensive diversity and inclusion courses. Customer satisfaction scores across all these dealerships have increased by an average of 47%. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Big Shaq pulled out his phone and showed a text he'd received that morning. This message came from a young woman who recently started working at Premier Motors through their new internship program. She wrote, "Mr. Thompson, I never thought a luxury car dealership would hire someone like me, a single mom from the South Side. But they didn't just hire me, they believed in me. Last week, I made my first commission. I can finally start saving for my daughter's college fund." Tears glistened in several eyes across the audience. Big Shaq continued, "Change isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about changing hearts and minds, one person at a time." As he spoke, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened quietly. Big Shaq's mother slipped in, accompanied by his assistant who had arranged the surprise. She stood at the back, watching her son with pride as he shared their family's values with hundreds of influential business leaders. "My mother taught me that success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about standing firm in your values while extending a hand to help others up. That's why I'm proud to announce the launch of the Thompson Business Leadership Initiative." A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. This program will provide mentorship, training, and startup funding to entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Premier Motors, Rising Star Motors, and 12 other local businesses have already signed on as partners. Together, we'll create opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked. The announcement was met with a standing ovation. As the applause died down, Big Shaq noticed Mr. Richards wiping his eyes. The former manager who had once judged him so harshly was now fully committed to being part of the solution. After the speech, during the networking reception, people gathered around Big Shaq to share their own stories and pledge support for the initiative. A group of young entrepreneurs from the South Side asked for his advice, while established business owners offered to become mentors. Mrs. Chen approached with the young salesman, who was now wearing a Rising Star Motors management trainee badge. "He's being promoted," she announced proudly. "He'll be helping us develop our new training program for entry-level sales staff." Patterson joined them, adding, "And he'll be consulting with Premier Motors too. We believe his perspective will be valuable in shaping our internship program." Big Shaq's mother finally made her way through the crowd to embrace her son. "Remember when you were 10, she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, and you set up that lemonade stand in our driveway? You gave free lemonade to the construction workers in the summer heat, even though some neighbors complained about them being there. You said, 'Mama, everybody deserves something cool to drink when they're working hard.'" The story brought warm smiles to those listening. "Even then," she continued, "you understood something many adults still struggle with, that every person deserves to be treated with dignity." As the evening wound down, a representative from the National Chamber of Commerce approached Big Shaq. "We'd like to take this initiative nationwide," she said. "Your story and the changes it inspired could help transform businesses across the country." Looking around the room, Big Shaq saw the future taking shape. The young salesman was deep in conversation with a group of business owners, sharing his insights. Patterson and Mrs. Chen were discussing plans to co-sponsor a scholarship program for aspiring automotive professionals. Mr. Richards was exchanging contact information with several diversity training experts. His phone buzzed with another message, this time from a luxury car manufacturer. They wanted to feature the story in their global corporate training program. What had started as a moment of humiliation in a local dealership was now poised to influence corporate culture worldwide. Big Shaq's mother squeezed his hand. "You see, son? Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage, like walking into a dealership in your favorite t-shirt, knowing your worth isn't measured by what you wear." 6 months after the Chamber of Commerce speech, Big Shaq stood in Times Square, watching as his story played on one of the massive digital billboards. The luxury car manufacturer had turned their training program into a public campaign. "Worth isn't worn, it's within." The video showed diverse salespeople and customers interacting at dealerships across the country, ending with a simple message about judging character, not appearances. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since morning. The Thompson Business Leadership Initiative was launching its 100th local chapter today, and success stories were pouring in from across the nation. He opened a video message from a dealership in Texas, where a former warehouse worker had just been promoted to sales manager. Another message showed a celebration at a Florida dealership that had just hired its most diverse sales team in its 30-year history. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called out. He turned to see a young boy, maybe 12 years old, holding his father's hand. "I saw your video in school. Our teacher used it for our lesson about treating everyone with respect." Big Shaq knelt down to the boy's level. "And what did you learn from it?" The boy straightened up proudly. "That we should look at who people are inside, not what they look like outside. My dad says you helped him get his job." The father stepped forward, extending his hand. "I was in the first batch of interns at Premier Motors' new program. Now I'm their top sales consultant. My son wants to be just like you when he grows up." As they chatted, Big Shaq's assistant reminded him it was time for his meeting at the National Automotive Dealers Association headquarters. They were gathering data on the impact of the initiative. Sales had increased across participating dealerships by an average of 35%, employee retention had improved by 58%, and customer satisfaction scores were at record highs. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. Walking into the building, Big Shaq remembered Mr. Richards' journey. The former manager had become one of the most passionate advocates for change, traveling to dealerships around the country to share his story of transformation. His presentations always began with, "I was the problem, but I chose to become part of the solution." The meeting room was packed with industry leaders, including Mrs. Chen, who had flown in to present Rising Star Motors' expanded training program. Their young star, now a full-fledged sales manager, had helped design a revolutionary approach to customer service that was being adopted nationwide. "The Thompson effect," one executive began, pointing to a chart, "that's what we're calling it. When dealerships implement these changes, we're seeing improvement not just in sales and customer satisfaction, but in community engagement and brand loyalty." Patterson, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, stood up. "I'd like to share something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Last week, a man came into Premier Motors wearing work boots covered in construction dust. Before our changes, he might have been ignored. Instead, our team welcomed him warmly. Turns out he owns the largest construction company in the state. He just ordered 12 luxury vehicles for his executive team." The room burst into applause, but Patterson wasn't finished. "But here's the real victory, when I asked our sales team about it later, they said they didn't know he owned a construction company when they approached him. They said they've learned to see every person as a valuable human being first, potential customer second." During a break, Big Shaq stepped out to call his mother. She was at Rising Star Motors, mentoring a group of young entrepreneurs. The dealership had transformed part of their space into a business development center, offering free workshops and networking events for aspiring business owners from underserved communities. "You should see these young people, son," his mother said excitedly. "They remind me of you when you were starting out, full of dreams and determination." One young lady just secured funding to open her own auto detailing business. "Remember when you used to wash cars in our driveway to earn extra money?" Big Shaq laughed, remembering those humble beginnings. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the lobby. A group of international executives had arrived, representatives from luxury car manufacturers in Europe and Asia. They wanted to implement the initiative globally. "Your story resonates across cultures," their spokesperson explained. "The issue of judgment based on appearances is universal. We want to be part of this change." As Big Shaq led them to the conference room, he passed a wall of photos showcasing success stories from the initiative. There was the single mom from Premier Motors, now a sales trainer herself. The young car washer turned manager, speaking at a national conference. Mr. Richards, sharing his story of transformation with a room full of managers. One of the international executives pointed to a photo of Big Shaq's old Camry, now displayed in Premier Motors' showroom as a reminder of where their journey began. "You still have it?" she asked. "Of course," Big Shaq smiled. "It reminds us that true luxury isn't about what we drive or wear, it's about how we treat each other." The afternoon session focused on expanding the initiative beyond the automotive industry. Representatives from real estate firms, luxury retail, and hospitality groups shared their plans to adapt the program for their sectors. The ripple effect was becoming a wave of change. As the day drew to a close, Big Shaq received one more surprise. The National Education Association wanted to develop a curriculum based on his story, teaching children about bias, respect, and the power of positive change. "Your story is becoming more than just a business lesson," the education director explained. "It's teaching people that one person's choice to respond to discrimination with dignity can transform an entire industry, and maybe even society itself." Looking out over the New York skyline as the sun set, Big Shaq thought about that day at the dealership that had started it all. He couldn't have known then that his choice to remain calm and dignified would impact so many lives. His phone buzzed with a text from the young boy he'd met in Times Square. His father had sent a photo of him practicing his business smile in the mirror. Building bridges, Big Shaq thought, remembering his mother's words, is always better than burning them. The lights of the city twinkled below, each one representing a story of transformation, a life changed, a lesson learned. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. 1 year after the incident at Premier Motors, Big Shaq found himself in Dubai, standing before an international audience of business leaders. The Thompson Business Leadership Initiative had gone global, and the results were beyond anything he could have imagined. The luxury hotel's conference room was filled with executives from every continent, each with their own stories of how the initiative had transformed their businesses. On screens around the room, live video feeds showed participating dealerships from Tokyo to London, Sydney to Sao Paulo, all connected for this landmark event. "A year ago," Big Shaq began, "I walked into a dealership hoping to buy a car. Today, I'm standing here watching a movement that's changing how businesses treat people around the world. But let me tell you about something that happened just last week at the original Premier Motors." He smiled, remembering the scene. A woman walked in wearing hospital scrubs, clearly just finished a long shift. Every sales representative rushed to help her, not because she looked wealthy, but because they've learned that every person deserves respect. She turned out to be a surgeon looking to buy 3 vehicles, 1 for herself and 2 for her children. But here's the beautiful part, when I asked the sales team later, they said her profession didn't matter. They would have treated her the same if she'd been a hospital janitor. The audience nodded in appreciation. A business leader from Singapore stood up to share how they'd adapted the program for their cultural context. "We've added modules about respecting age and traditional values while breaking down prejudices about young entrepreneurs," she explained. "Our customer satisfaction rates have increased by 65% since implementation." During the lunch break, Big Shaq received a video call from Mrs. Chen. The young manager who had started as a car washer was now opening his own dealership, with backing from both Rising Star Motors and Premier Motors. The video showed him cutting the ribbon, his eyes glistening with tears of joy as he thanked his mentors. "Remember when you first spoke to him?" Mrs. Chen asked. He was afraid to even approach customers. Now he's training others to see the potential in everyone they meet. The afternoon session focused on the initiative's impact beyond the automotive industry. A luxury hotel chain reported that their revised training program had transformed their guest services. A high-end retail corporation shared stories of increased sales after eliminating appearance-based customer profiling. Mr. Richards, who had flown in for the event, took the stage to share his perspective. "I was the face of everything wrong with customer service," he admitted. "But thanks to Big Shaq's response to my discrimination, I learned that change is possible at any age, at any stage of your career." He went on to describe the training program he'd developed, now used in 20 countries. "We don't just teach people what not to do, we help them understand why treating everyone with dignity isn't just right, it's good business." The day's most touching moment came when a video played showing children at schools around the world learning from the curriculum based on Big Shaq's experience. In a classroom in Brazil, students role-played different customer service scenarios. In a South African school, teenagers discussed how to respond to discrimination with dignity. In a Japanese high school, students presented projects about breaking down societal prejudices. "Your story has become a blueprint for teaching the next generation about respect and resilience," the education program director announced. "We're seeing remarkable changes in how young people think about judgment and bias." Big Shaq's mother, watching proudly from the front row, wiped away tears as student after student shared how the story had impacted them. One young girl from India spoke about how she'd stood up to unfair treatment at a local shop, using the techniques she'd learned from the program. A boy from Canada described how he'd changed his own biases after learning about unconscious prejudice. During the evening reception, Patterson approached Big Shaq with news from home. Premier Motors had just been voted the best place to work in the city. Their internship program had expanded to include partnerships with 3 local colleges, and their employee diversity metrics had become an industry benchmark. "But here's what really matters," Patterson said, pulling out his phone to show a recent security camera clip. "Watch this." The video showed a teenage boy who had walked into the showroom wearing clothes that clearly marked him as being from a struggling background. Every sales representative treated him with respect, giving him their full attention as he explained he was doing research for a school project about running a business. "They spent an hour with him," Patterson explained, his voice full of pride. "Showed him everything about the business, gave him their cards, offered to mentor him. That's real change, when it happens even when nobody's watching." As the Dubai event drew to a close, Big Shaq received an unexpected message. The United Nations was interested in incorporating the initiative's principles into their global business ethics guidelines. What had started as a moment of discrimination in a local dealership was now shaping international business standards. That evening, standing on the balcony of his hotel room overlooking the Dubai skyline, Big Shaq called his mother. "Remember what you always told me about ripples in a pond?" he asked. "That you never know how far they'll go," she replied. "But you do know they start with one small action." "I just wanted to buy a car that day, Mama," he said softly. "I never imagined it would lead to all this." "But that's exactly why it did," she responded. "Because you weren't trying to start a movement. You were just being true to who you are, treating others with dignity even when they don't offer you the same. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's authentic." As he ended the call, Big Shaq noticed a message from the young boy he'd met in Times Square months ago. The child had won a school leadership award for starting an anti-bullying program based on the principles he'd learned from Big Shaq's story. "See, Mr. Thompson," the boy's father had written. "Your ripples just keep spreading." Looking out at the twinkling city lights, Big Shaq smiled, knowing that somewhere, in dealerships and businesses around the world, people were learning to see beyond appearances, to treat each person with dignity, to create positive change one interaction at a time. The story wasn't just about him anymore, it belonged to everyone who had been inspired to make a difference in their own way. The United Nations headquarters in New York hummed with anticipation. 18 months after that fateful day at Premier Motors, Big Shaq stood at the podium of the General Assembly Hall, preparing to address representatives from 193 countries. The Thompson Business Leadership Initiative was being incorporated into the UN's Global Compact, making it part of the international standard for ethical business practices. Before beginning his speech, Big Shaq touched the worn wallet in his pocket, the same one he'd pulled out that day at the dealership. He kept it as a reminder that appearances never tell the whole story. His mother sat in the diplomatic section, wearing the same proud smile she'd had when he won his first spelling bee in 3rd grade. "Distinguished delegates," he began, "this journey started with a simple truth my mother taught me: dignity isn't earned, it's inherent in every human being." What happened at Premier Motors that day wasn't unique. What was unique was how everyone involved chose to respond. The screens behind him showed live feeds from participating businesses worldwide. In a dealership in Cape Town, South Africa, a former street vendor was receiving keys to his new office as sales manager. In Mumbai, India, a woman was conducting a training session for luxury retail staff, teaching them about unconscious bias. In Rio de Janeiro, a young mechanic was being promoted to the sales floor, breaking old barriers about who could represent luxury brands. These changes aren't just about selling cars or luxury goods, Big Shaq continued. They're about recognizing the fundamental dignity in every person who walks through our doors, regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstance. During the lunch break, Mr. Richards, now a global ambassador for the initiative, shared his perspective with a group of business leaders. "I was the face of prejudice that day," he admitted. "Now I'm the face of transformation. If I could change, anyone can." A notification popped up on Big Shaq's phone. Premier Motors had just been featured in Harvard Business Review. Their case study showed how treating every customer with equal respect had led to a 300% increase in sales over 18 months. More importantly, their employee satisfaction scores had reached unprecedented levels. Mrs. Chen sent a video from Rising Star Motors. Their young manager-turned-owner had just launched a mentorship program for at-risk youth, teaching them not just about cars, but about business ethics and customer service. The video showed teenagers in professional attire, practicing their greeting skills and learning about respect-based sales techniques. "Remember when he was just washing cars?" Mrs. Chen's message read. "Now he's changing lives, just like you changed his." The afternoon session focused on the educational impact. Schools in 50 countries had adopted the curriculum based on Big Shaq's experience. A video montage showed students from around the world sharing what they'd learned. A teenager from Kenya: "I learned that how you treat others when you have power shows your true character." A young girl from Sweden: "It taught me that responding to prejudice with dignity is stronger than responding with anger." A boy from Japan: "I understand now that true success isn't just about making money, it's about lifting others up." Patterson, who had flown in for the event, shared updates from the original Premier Motors. The dealership had become a global training center, hosting businesses from around the world who wanted to learn about their transformation. Their internship program had expanded into a full scholarship initiative, funding education for underprivileged students interested in business. "But here's what really makes me proud," Patterson said, showing a recent security footage clip. "Watch what happens when someone who looks like they can't afford our cars walks in." The video showed every staff member treating a modestly dressed visitor with genuine respect and attention. There was no hesitation, no judgment, just authentic human connection. "This happens every day now," Patterson explained. "Not because they're being watched, but because they've truly changed from within." During the evening reception, Big Shaq received news that touched him deeply. The young boy from Times Square, whose father had been one of Premier Motors' first interns, had started a school project that was going viral. He'd created a video series called Worth Isn't Worn, featuring interviews with successful people wearing their most casual clothes, teaching kids not to judge by appearances. His mother joined him on the UN building's terrace, overlooking the East River. "You know what makes me proudest," she said, adjusting his tie the way she used to fix his school uniform. "Not the global recognition or the UN partnership. It's that you stayed true to the values we talked about at our kitchen table." Big Shaq smiled, remembering those kitchen table conversations. "You always said that how we treat others shows who we really are. And look how many people you've taught that lesson to," she replied, gesturing to the gathering inside where business leaders from around the world were sharing their stories of transformation. A group of young entrepreneurs from various countries approached them, each holding copies of the new UN Global Compact guidelines that incorporated the initiative's principles. They shared their own stories of facing discrimination and how Big Shaq's example had inspired them to respond with dignity rather than despair. One young woman from Brazil spoke up, "In my country, they say, agua mole em pedra dura, tanto bate 8k fura, soft water on hard stone, hitting until it breaks through." Your story shows that persistent dignity can break through even the hardest prejudices. As the evening drew to a close, Big Shaq received a message from an unexpected source, the original security camera footage owner who had posted the video of his dealership experience. "I never thought pressing share that day would help change the world," they wrote. "Thank you for showing us all a better way." Looking out at the New York skyline, Big Shaq reflected on how far that single moment had rippled. From a local dealership to the United Nations, from one car washer's dream to a global movement for change, all because people chose to transform a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for growth. His phone buzzed one last time that evening, a message from a young sales trainee at Premier Motors. "Mr. Thompson, today I helped a customer who reminded me of you that day. They came in wearing work clothes, covered in paint. I remembered your story and gave them my full attention. They turned out to be a small business owner looking to buy a fleet of vehicles. But you know what? Even if they hadn't been, I would have treated them the same way. That's what you taught us, every person deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter what." Big Shaq smiled, knowing that the real success of his story wasn't measured in sales figures or global partnerships, but in these small, daily moments of human dignity and respect. The revolution wasn't just in boardrooms and UN halls, it was in the hearts and minds of people who chose to see beyond appearances and treat each person with the dignity they deserve. 2 years to the day after walking into Premier Motors in his jeans and t-shirt, Big Shaq stood in the exact same spot. The dealership had transformed beyond recognition, not just in its appearance, but in its soul. The walls now displayed photos of success stories from around the world, and the showroom had become a symbol of inclusive excellence. Today was special. Premier Motors and Rising Star Motors were hosting a global summit, bringing together people whose lives had been touched by what the media now called the Thompson effect. The old showroom floor had been converted into an event space, filled with individuals from all walks of life. Mr. Richards, now a renowned speaker on business transformation, stood at the entrance greeting visitors, the same spot where he had once judged Big Shaq. "Everything comes full circle," he said, embracing Big Shaq warmly. 2 years ago, I was the problem. Today, I get to be part of the solution." The young manager from Rising Star Motors, who had started as a car washer, was now running 3 successful dealerships. He had just launched a foundation providing scholarships to underprivileged youth interested in business. "Remember when I was afraid to talk to customers?" he laughed, addressing a group of eager students. "Now I'm teaching others how to build bridges of respect." Mrs. Chen moved through the crowd, proudly showing off Rising Star Motors' latest achievement, being named the most inclusive workplace in the country. Under her leadership, the dealership had become a model for businesses worldwide, proving that success and social responsibility could go hand in hand. Patterson, looking more relaxed than ever, shared the latest figures from Premier Motors. "Our sales have tripled, yes," he acknowledged, "but that's not what matters most. We've helped launch 50 new businesses through our mentorship program. Former interns are now business owners. That's the real measure of success. The boy from Times Square, now a teenager, was there with his father. His "Worth Isn't Worn" video series had gone viral, reaching millions of young people worldwide. "Mr. Thompson," he said excitedly, "my school is using your story in our business ethics class. Even the bullies are changing how they treat people." Big Shaq's mother sat in her special place of honor, surrounded by people sharing stories of how her son's experience had changed their lives. "I just taught him to treat everyone with dignity," she said modestly. "He's the one who showed the world how powerful that simple lesson can be." The United Nations representative delivered unexpected news. The Thompson Business Leadership Initiative was being incorporated into the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, recognizing that treating people with dignity was crucial to building a sustainable, equitable future. A live video feed connected the event to participating locations worldwide. In a Dubai luxury mall, staff shared how they had transformed their approach to customer service. In a São Paulo business school, students demonstrated their new training program based on Big Shaq's experience. In a Tokyo boardroom, executives showed data on how their inclusive policies had revolutionized their corporate culture. The original security camera footage played on a screen, but now it was followed by hundreds of positive stories it had inspired. Each clip showed moments of dignity, respect, and transformation from around the globe, a continuous reminder that one person's response to discrimination could spark worldwide change. A group of former Premier Motors customers who had witnessed the original incident returned to share their perspectives. "We were silent that day," one admitted. "But your response taught us that staying silent in the face of discrimination makes us part of the problem. Now we speak up, we take action, we make change happen." The young woman who had started as a single mom in Premier Motors' internship program now ran their training department. 2 years ago, I was struggling to make ends meet, she shared. Today, I'm helping others break through the same barriers I faced. That's the beauty of this movement, it keeps paying forward. Big Shaq's old Camry still held its place of honor in the showroom, but now it was surrounded by notes from visitors worldwide, each sharing how the story had impacted their lives. One note read, "Your dignity in the face of discrimination gave me courage to start my own business." Another, "You taught me that my worth isn't determined by others' judgments." As the day drew to a close, Big Shaq gathered everyone for a final message. He pulled out his old wallet, the same one he'd shown that day, and held it up. "This wallet taught the world a valuable lesson," he said. "But not because of what was in it. The lesson was in how we choose to respond when others try to diminish our dignity." He continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, 2 years ago, I walked in here hoping to buy a car. Instead, we all bought into something much more valuable, the idea that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or what they wear." The crowd fell silent as he reached into his pocket and pulled out something else, the t-shirt he'd worn that day. "This isn't just a shirt anymore," he said. "It's a reminder that clothes don't define character. Actions do. Choices do. Responses do." His mother joined him, adding her own wisdom, "When you respond to judgment with dignity, to discrimination with grace, to prejudice with understanding, that's when real change begins." The event concluded with an announcement that would ensure the story's legacy. The Thompson Business Leadership Initiative was establishing a permanent foundation, funded by businesses worldwide, to promote dignity-based leadership and provide opportunities for underserved communities. As the sun set on the transformed dealership, Big Shaq stood in the spot where it all began. Mr. Richards, Mrs. Chen, Patterson, and all the others who had been part of this journey gathered around him. The young car washer turned businessman, the single mom turned trainer, the prejudiced manager turned advocate, each represented a story of personal transformation that had contributed to the larger movement. "You know what's beautiful?" Big Shaq's mother said, looking around at the gathered crowd. "This story isn't over. Every person who learns from it becomes part of it. Every life touched adds a new chapter. Every moment of chosen dignity creates new ripples of change. Big Shaq smiled, thinking about how a moment of potential humiliation had transformed into a global movement for dignity and respect. In the end, he said, it's not about the cars we drive or the clothes we wear. It's about the choices we make when faced with judgment, and the power we have to turn moments of discrimination into opportunities for transformation. As people began to leave, a young person approached Big Shaq with tears in their eyes. Your story changed how I see myself, they said. Now I know that my worth isn't in what others see, it's in how I choose to respond to how they see me. That, Big Shaq realized, was the true legacy of his experience, not the global initiatives or corporate changes, but the countless individual hearts and minds that had learned to value dignity over judgment, respect over prejudice, and transformation over retaliation. The story that began with a simple car purchase had become a blueprint for how to transform discrimination into dignity, one person, one choice, one moment at a time.